Nigeria is making headlines in the debt markets, this time with a record-breaking sukuk issuance that far exceeded expectations. In May, the country raised 2.2 trillion naira through a government-issued sukuk bond, a non-interest Islamic finance instrument. Originally targeting just 300 billion naira for infrastructure funding, the offering saw overwhelming investor demand. According to Nigeria's Debt Management Office, the oversubscribed bond attracted a wide pool of subscribers ranging from retail investors and pension funds to non-interest and conventional banks, as well as asset managers. Today on the show, we sit down with Benga Mababeola, MD, Sycamore Investment and Asset Management Limited. He shares insights into what made this sukuk so attractive to investors and what it signals about Nigeria's broader borrowing strategy and investor appetite.
Based on everything that's happened so far this year, can you tell us what the public markets is looking like? So everything from bonds, we've been seeing the different treasury bills, euro bonds, and Islamic bonds, and all of that. So can you give us like a lowdown of what's going on out there right now?
Well, yeah. So it's been an interesting year so far. We're in the middle of the year, So going into the year, there was a lot of positive expectation from the macro environment, and that was expected to filter through. And I don't think there was any disappointment really in terms of how the FX situation panned out or is panning out for the year. There's optimism. Interest rates are still high, more or less on the high side because MPR is still 27.5. That's impacting fixed income instruments and treasury bills and bonds. Those bonds currently this year are running at about between 18.5% and 19%. Coming from last year, it's still on the high side. So there's been a lot of activity based on that. So just like you mentioned, there's been issuances from the beginning of the year, treasury bills, bonds on a monthly basis, and even more recently, the sukuk bond that you talked about. That was an interesting one as well because we got a significant level of subscription. It was subscribed up to about 2.2 trillion thereabout, compared to the issue offer, which was about 350 billion. That's significantly higher. So there's a lot of activity, there's a lot of liquidity in the system. So that's kind of a catalyst for more trading volumes in the markets.
Interesting. Now, I've talked to a number of people in the financial services space, and a lot of people don't understand what the sukuk bond is all about. Like, how does it work? And I'm even surprised people knew enough about it to even oversubscribe. So can you tell us, just let us know what the sukuk bond is all about?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because, I wasn't surprised. I think most players who've been in the market will not be too surprised with the level of adoption and subscription levels, particularly because in the Nigerian market, the sukuk bond as an instrument is relatively an emerging asset. I say so because while there's been sukuk instruments issued in the past and previous years, it's been in limited supply, really. So compared to traditional bonds, for example, that are issued every month. Every month from January to December, there's a calendar for bond issuances, traditional bonds. Sukuks generally have been issued by the federal government in special cases where they want to finance projects, road projects, general assets. So that has been in limited supply. And if you now think about the demand side of that instrument, which is Sharia compliant investors, they are thirsty for those kind of products. Those monies will not go to traditional bonds, for example, because of riba. It's against their Sharia religious allowances. So when there is a sukuk issuance, there tends to be a lot more demand, a lot more subscription. All of that money comes out of the closet and tries to plug in. So when the subscription level came out, the record, I wasn't surprised at all.
Interesting. So what makes it special? Like, what makes it Sharia compliant? And if it is Sharia compliant, what makes it interesting for people to say, let me do this and still get returns from it? So how does it work?
Again, good question. I think just tailing the previous question. So sukuks generally are, they're similar to traditional bonds, only that they are, like you said, they're Sharia compliant. And Sharia compliant just means they are in line with Islamic laws in terms of ethics, ethical investing, based on Sharia law. Sharia law is basically Islamic law. What are those things that makes it compliant? Those are things like, banned or disallowed activities like gambling, like prostitution and racketeering, alcohol, banned food substances like, pork, for example, in Islam. All of that put together, there's more. All of that put together kind of gives a framework for ethical investing. And you're looking at it through the lens of, Sharia, which is Islamic. So if you think about it generally, you'll see that it captures a wide range of investors, both Muslims and non-Muslims who want to invest in an ethical manner.
Okay, so if the market is, say, down and lots of volatilities in the market, are you going to get more interest in something like sukuk bonds, or is sukuk bond just going to just be this way, whether the market is booming or not? Is this par for the course, basically?
Okay, so your question is if the market is down, for example, and other asset classes are impacted, how will sukuk perform, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So first of all, just like I talked about, the level of demand in sukuks already, that generally feeds through. The fact that there's a lot of that segment of investment funds that are seeking things like sukuk, that will impact even market upsides and downsides. So if there's a crisis, for example, a financial crisis or economic crisis, sukuk will generally hold up when you compare it to other traditional assets like bonds. Mainly because, number one, I talked about demand. Number two is that sukuks are generally asset-backed. They're issued to finance projects. You'll see if you drive through Lagos on the island, you'll see some pillars where they actually even inscribes the name of the sukuk that was issued to finance the project. So they're actually financing for actual projects. That means that, whether there's a downturn or not, there are real assets that are backing those transactions. And more often than not, those transactions actually, or those assets, pay for themselves. The other thing is the fact that most of the time, the institutions that issue sukuk are very high quality. Like, governments, for example, the federal government issues sukuks. Large corporates also issue sukuks. You hardly see small SMEs going into that because of the high risk and market volatility that affects them.
That's interesting. Now, if we're going to look at it, you mentioned that the public market has been booming, a lot of activity and all of that.
Correct.
Do you think it's sustainable? Do you think this is just a symptom of the broader economic environment? People are looking for how to make money. Or is this a systemic shift? Do you think this is going to be a long-term thing? Is this going to be sustained in the future?
I want to believe, and even from the data that we're seeing, I'll look at it from two sides. I think there's a lot more awareness for sukuk, even though it's relatively young in terms of issuance in the country. More people are aware of it. More people looking for ethical investing are aware of it. You can easily walk into an asset manager like Sycamore, for example, and ask for an instrument like sukuk, or any other asset, and you get, a response, you get an offer or something like that. This is different from the way it was in the past. It wasn't very well known. There are more Islamic financial institutions now. There are Islamic banks, there's Taj, there's Jais, all of that. So there's more awareness for investors. There's also the side of liquidity. So in recent times, you will have heard that there's a lot of system liquidity. There's money supply. There's an increase in the money supply in Nigeria right now. Mm-hmm. That's been the case this year so far. That has spurred trading activities in fixed income. That has spurred all that significant bids for these instruments as well. So in the near term, for the foreseeable future, at least for this year, going into next year, that liquidity will play out. The fact that there's money in the system that is really looking for where to park in terms of investment. So this, in my opinion, it's going to be sustainable.
So there's money in the system, and we're all complaining.
There is there's money in the system, apparently.
Yeah.
There is money in the system.
Interesting. So do you think a lot of education, do you think the public is well educated enough to be able to leverage these opportunities? Because the sukuk, there are other fixed instruments. For instance, I didn't know, I was on TV some weeks back and I was complaining about how I didn't even know my bank had like some of these investment instruments that I could actually leverage. No one said, hey, you could actually do this. So do you think there's enough education going on for the public to actually make well-informed decisions on things like this? And what can be done?
Yeah, so you're definitely right. There's a way to go about investor education about assets like sukuk that are just coming up. So if you compare it with other assets, there is not enough coverage for sukuks. Again, because it's ethical investing, most people are used to, I want to buy a bank, I want to buy banking stocks, I want to buy CPs from whatever industry. But more specialized assets like sukuks, because it's an emerging asset class, the coverage is a bit limited for now. So we have institutions like, Sharia advisors who actually advise on these transactions. They are populating the market now. Again, because it's emerging, we're having more corporate players who are actually contributing to investor education. That will improve, and I think that it will improve with more sukuks that are going to be issued in the future. That situation with investor education and awareness will improve. But I mean, the situation right now, if you compare it with traditional assets, definitely needs a lot more work to be fair.
How about traditional assets? Do you think there's even enough
of
that?
I mean, again, that will also depend on demographics. So, older people who've been investing in shares or investing in T-bills through their banks are probably aware of assets and investing. Again, it's also limited to, some class of investors. Retail investors are generally excluded. So there's still the gap even in, and you're right about that, there's still the gap even in traditional assets. But if we compare it with specialized assets like sukuk, there's still, the gap is still wide. So generally speaking, for assets and investing generally, there's room for improvements for investor education, much less for sukuk as well.
So to be clear, anyone can actually leverage sukuk. It's not just limited to...
That's the interesting thing about sukuk. Sukuk, I even forgot to mention, sukuks are kind of tailored for even retail, because if you want to invest in a federal government bond, for example, you need about 50 million naira. Minimum, to invest. And for sukuks, the way it's designed, if you even look at the last sukuk issuance, if you have 10,000 naira, you can actually invest in that sukuk. So it's structured and tailored to all classes of investors, from retail to institutions as well.
Okay, and I don't have to be Muslim to be able to leverage it?
Absolutely not. You can be an atheist even if.
Okay.
But it's all about ethical investing, just backed by Sharia laws.
Okay. Yeah, that's very useful to know. I just need to get it clear for the audience okay, this is something that anyone can leverage. I didn't know it was even as low as 10,000. Yeah,
10,000. It's a very good way for even the institutions who are working on this are, and I think that it's impressive that they're even looking into the future in terms of making those instruments attractive for all classes of investors, even foreign investors.
That's interesting. Now, while I was doing my research, I was searching the internet and I saw things around. Again, this sounds like classic startup, being unnecessarily futuristic, but I was seeing things around using blockchain to improve sukuk issuance and things like that. Okay. Do you think that is feasible at this point in time, or are we just shooting for whatever?
We're in 2025. I think I need to wake you up from your doubts. Okay. This is 2025, and a lot of technology and innovation is going on. And we're in a good position in Nigeria because we have a SEC that is actually waking up to shoulder a lot of responsibility in that area. There's a lot going on from even the authorities to support innovation with these types of products. So I think it's definitely a reality that these things can be. You can use blockchain technology to drive issuance of sukuks or other assets like that. It definitely helps for easy adoption by retail investors. I talked about the fact that the entry level is 10,000 naira. So with technology, with tokenization, or distributed ledger to make it efficient, those small amounts of money will easily plug in and be able to adopt and invest in those securities. So I think SEC is doing a very good job to support, and I think the ecosystem, in terms of fintechs, in terms of even the financial institutions that are issuing the instruments, are working towards that. I think is very possible in Nigeria. Nigeria is alive with this technology, and I was just checking it out recently. Dubai actually issued smart sukuks, so that's already a reality in Dubai. Somewhere around there as well, I think Bahrain or so, they launched a platform where you can actually issue sukuks using blockchain. So, I mean, if it can happen in those places, I don't see why it can't happen in Nigeria.
And you're confident that our regulatory environment is ready for something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned I'm impressed with how the SEC is approaching the markets, especially coming from the new ISA law that was signed into the rule that was recently signed. It speaks a lot about digital assets, innovation, even specifically addressing or providing guidelines for digital asset issuances. So I think the SEC is actually, the regulatory environment is encouraging, even holding up all of their responsibility with investor protection. They're still very much open to innovation, and market development. So I think the environment and the regulatory environment is ripe.
Okay. Yeah, I think one thing that I found interesting from our last interview was you were trying to picture a situation where the SEC, the regulators, and the players in the space come together to actually build. Yeah. So can you just reiterate that for the camera? Let's.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, if I remember our conversation very well, but I think my idea was the fact that there's a lot of opportunity that that the Nigerian investment environment can actually take advantage of. The fact that SEC is now appearing to be more open and doing things to also show that they are supporting innovation, supporting technology, product development. The players themselves now need to also wake up, because I know that a lot of players in our space, capital market operators, fund managers, issuing houses, even fintechs, are used to the heavy hand of SEC. So everybody has more or less recoiled and just tried to tick the box and not just fall foul with SEC generally. So that has stifled innovation in a sense. So in a situation where players wake up to their responsibility to innovate more in an environment where SEC is actually encouraging them to do so within regulatory framework, obviously, there's a lot that can be achieved. There's a lot more new and innovative products that we'll see. There's a lot more market liquidity in terms of movement of cash and assets that makes it easy and improves investor confidence that can also experience. So, I mean, that was my idea. I think it's an opportunity that we can have in this current regulatory environment as well.
Yeah, I think an interesting question to ask is, with the current macroeconomic environment, inflation is at a very, very high level right now. How do we now balance risk and reward for the different asset classes? And looking at everything, what asset class would you say Nigerians should tilt towards, all things considered? And yeah.
Yeah, great question. That's I mean, it's a real challenge for most investors in Nigeria, retail and institutions. So the first thing I'll say is, I mean, the problem you're posing is simply the fact that the real return, when you compare inflation to where most of the assets, the risk-free assets are yielding, still has a gap that kind of just talks about negative real return. The first thing I'll usually say about that is it's better to invest than not to invest at all. First of all, something is better than zero. Whatever you do, make sure you are, you're investing. But talk to a financial advisor to help you. You can talk to your asset manager, you can talk to your stockbroker. But that said, with inflation at where it is now, you are better served if you have a blended portfolio. So again, I'm saying blended because different people have different risk appetite. Different institutions will have a different risk appetite than retail individual investors. So you need to identify exactly that, look at your objectives. But a model portfolio that you can look at in this environment to enhance your return should actually have equities and stocks in your portfolio. You can have up to 40 to 50%. It gives you, exposure to upside movements in share prices, given, the positive outlook that we're seeing in the macro environment and the companies that are listed on the stock market. Positives in terms of the FX situation being normalized and all of that. In your portfolio, you should also have fixed income instruments, like we mentioned, sukuks. We should have a percentage of that in your portfolio. You should have T-bills, and there are lots of very high quality commercial papers right now as well that helps to improve or enhance the return you can have on your portfolio. If you have a very good blended portfolio with very good advice, you can actually achieve positive real return.
Awesome. So yeah, let's aim for the positive real returns with the blended portfolio. Thank you so much, Benga.